All right, we're back for practice 13 of Colorado football camp. And Adam, we are over the halfway point now. And there's a game like in a couple weeks. Kind of crazy.
It is 2 weeks from Friday. Obviously, Colorado State plays a game before the Rocky Mountain Showdown for the second year in a row. We talked to Mike MacIntyre about that. He was adamant last year. He's adamant again this year that that's an advantage for the Rams. I definitely see it from the standpoint of getting those first game jitters out of the way. But I think because you have a full game of tape on the other team, and you know, it's maybe a little less this year because it's Hawaii instead of Oregon State. Maybe CSU can keep a few things in their back pocket that they weren't able to a year ago. But to me, I think it's a wash. I don't really think there's an advantage on both ends of it. I don't really see it as a huge advantage for the Rams.
I agree. I think that I would say there's advantages on both sides. And I actually asked Mike Bobo this, or he talked about it this summer at the Colorado Kickoff Luncheon down in the Springs, where he said the big thing for us is that with us being kind of a smaller team without the depth of a Power 5, that gives us, gets us used to the speed of the game a little bit quicker. And so I see the advantage there that Mike MacIntyre is talking about. But I agree, especially with this CSU team with so much newness on defense, and you don't know their offensive weapons really that well.
Yeah.
I think it's a big advantage for CU there to be able to have some tape on these guys and be able to see them. So I agree. It's probably a wash.
Well, if there's an advantage for CSU, it's going to show itself in the first quarter, the first half, right?
Right.
If you don't take advantage of it at that point, I think by the second half, these Colorado guys will have gotten their feet used to game speed again.
Yeah, and with CU, there's a lot of guys that they're going to be playing that night that are trying to get used to the speed of the game. So that first half could be interesting.
Yeah, it will be interesting. We also talked to Mike MacIntyre about James Stefano. Obviously, last year he was a 30-year-old true freshman that had never been to a college football game until he played in one. Mike MacIntyre says he's 20% better. He was pretty darn good last year. He mentioned last year at this time was a little bit concerned about Stefano's speed getting the kickoff, and that he's improved a lot in that area. So certainly not an area that fans have been concerned, and it doesn't sound like there's any reason to.
Yeah, and you asked about Stefano's range, and MacIntyre mentioned that he just recently kicked, a 57-yarder, he said?
56, I think.
56, 57-yarder that was going up and was clearing the bar pretty easily. So it sounds like his range is pretty good.
Yeah. What else? You talked to, asked him about Terrence Lang as well today.
Yeah, asked about Terrence Lang. We're not allowed to talk to Terrence until after the first game, I'm told. But Terrence is a guy that we've talked about a lot that flashes, but then there's times that, he doesn't look so good. But asked MacIntyre about the consistency, and he said that he's getting a lot better in that regard. And when he flashes, it's because he's really good, and he's a pretty powerful, strong player there. So there's some hope there that consistency is getting better. And if it is, they've got a pretty good duo there with him and Israel Antwine.
Yeah, actually, after I tweeted out that Israel Antwine does 500 push-ups a day, I had a fan ask me, who's got better potential between Antwine and Lang? And I thought it was a good question. My answer was, I think because we know Israel Antwine has got a great work ethic, that I think he will end up having more of an impact here. But that said, if Lang really fully 100% buys in at some point, I mean, he's got that length that you can't coach, and very different players, but have a chance to be pretty special here. Yeah,
I agree with you. And to be honest with you, when you look at Tava Finau, just the way he looks, we haven't seen him really on the field. He's been a little banged up in this camp, and Jalen Sammy has been out. But I like the future of that position. I mean, I think for the first time since Mike's been here, there's some talent on that defensive line in that young group.
And there's pressure on them now with recruiting 2017. They have 17 verbal commitments, 1 defensive lineman at this point. You've got to get, at the bare minimum, one of those Israel Antwine, Terrence Langs a year. Obviously, you'd like, in a perfect world, to get 2 or 3 of them every recruiting cycle.
Yeah.
It's not easy. There's not a ton of guys out there, and there's a lot of top programs that are all going after those guys, so it's difficult. But that's, if you want to talk about ever getting back to a Pac-12 championship game and competing in that game, that's where recruiting needs to take a step up. And I feel like we're beating a dead horse on some level because we've been talking about that for the last few years. But you can't keep going back to the JUCO ranks for defensive linemen.
Right, and so it's great seeing these high school kids come in and show well. So one last thing, you were able to talk to Jack Harris. So talk about that conversation and kind of his role here. He's a grad assistant here working with the offensive line.
Yep. Very cool. It's funny, we went out to a high school camp here at CU, and it's like, he looks kind of familiar, but he's lost some weight. That's Jack Harris. And it's a kind of a cool story. He actually worked in the oil industry after he graduated from here, but he said he wasn't getting his work done because he was also coaching middle school football, and his mind was just running with the possibilities of what he was going to do at practice after he got off work. And so it kind of sparked it. He talked to his wife, and she was on board with him going into the college coaching ranks. He came here from Central Michigan, and he's back here. He says he loves the offensive line group, the makeup of this group, even though they've got a lot of young guys there. So it's cool. We've seen Chidera Uzo-Diribe come back here, a bunch of guys. There's a ton of former Buffs out there coaching right now, so it's cool that he can have his first Power 5 experience as a coach here where he played himself.
Yeah, well, it'll be awesome to see what he can do with that offensive line. I know Buff fans want to see him do well with that offensive line, get them playing well. So that'll do it for us today. We'll be back later on this weekend to talk about some more practices.